Hello, everyone. It's me again, but I promise I won't be talking for too long. I'm just here to introduce our next speaker, and we'll start with a keynote, and this time not by me. But I'm very excited to have her because also for a very brief period in my career, I worked at BCG, worked on some super interesting projects, and that was right before founding Localize, and I think BCG is looking at a lot of topics that are top of mind for leaders in the company, various fields. And I think the fact that now BCG is also very deeply looking into global mobility, talent mobility, what's happening is actually a great argument because it means that the strategic importance is recognized more and more. So I'm very happy to have Orsolya here with me today, who is a partner at BCG and who's been working in the broader people space, but also has looked very deeply into global mobility. Thanks for being here, and I'm very much looking forward to the insights that you'll share.
Thanks for having me. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for having me. I called already some really interesting conversations in the morning, and I really believe mobility has a much more strategic and stronger role to play than how it's sometimes perceived. So I hope events such as these also contribute to that. What I would like to share with you today is the results of a large study I'm leading for a pretty long time now. It started in 2014. And what we do is we look at what people think about mobility. So this is not going to be about corporate leaders or, we haven't surveyed anyone in a company. We have surveyed normal people around the world. And some of the questions we ask is, where do you want to go? Do you want to go abroad for work? And then we monitor these trends for the past 10 years to see how they change. And one could ask after 10 years, is it still interesting? But I promise you it is. So I will share some of those findings today. I'm not 100% sure if the clicker is clicking. Aha, it is clicking something. Okay. Yes. So why are we even talking about this? Because talent is an increasingly critical, scarce resource. And if something is scarce, you need to be a lot better in understanding it, managing it. And a lot of companies tend to be not the best in managing their people. They may be really good in managing the customers or the finances or the supply chain. People, not so much. But when you ask CEOs, this is a 2024 survey, what are they the most worried about? You can see that 2 of the 3 things they mentioned on the top are related to talent. So this is one of the main reasons we work on, together with our partners, the Stepstone Group and the network, on better understanding this critical scarce resource, people. The survey I'll tell you about is called the Decoding Global Talent Survey. You can see this is running since 2014. We don't do it every year because it's so much work. So we have had several 100,000 of respondents every time we ran the survey. So we are coming up to nearly 1 million data points for the past 10 years. And what is extremely interesting is you can see some of the mega trends of how what people want changes. And we don't only ask them about mobility, but a large part is mobility. So we will be talking about this report, Dream Destinations and Mobility Trends, that we published earlier this year. And I'll share with you 5 most interesting findings. But just that you get an idea who filled out this survey, we have 150,000 people this time. They tend to be maybe a little younger, a little higher educated than the average, so you could call them, kind of skilled workers or talent, however you want to use the word, and they are really from all over the world. The survey had respondents from 187 countries. Some countries I didn't even know were countries. So what did we learn? First insight, despite pandemic, geopolitical uncertainty and everything, talent remains mobile. One question we always ask is, would you move abroad for work? Important to note, the survey is about work only. So moving abroad for work. And what you can see here is in the middle is people who are overall willing, but that breaks down to a category which we call actively mobile. That's the green, also that's the blue, who say, I'm right now looking for a job abroad actively. And then you have the green, which is like, I would go if I really have to. And then the gray who said, yes, I would go like if I really can't find a job in my country. And if you look at 2023, the actively mobile percentage, say 23%, if you would apply that to all the working population of the world, that's 800 million professionals who are right now actively looking for a job abroad. So it's still large, and that didn't even really decrease. So what we saw that the overall willingness dropped a bit since 2018, and actually 14 it was even higher. But the ones who are serious about it, the 21, 23%, that didn't change quite much. So in summary, yes, people still want to go abroad for work. Something interesting is where you are from and how much you want to go abroad for work is of course correlated, but it's not so much about the income per capita or any other factor, but it's more about countries where the population is growing, so the birth rates are higher, are more likely to be mobile. It makes sense, but it's also a bit of good news if you look at the shrinking and static, which is not a very nice way, but that's how we call the European countries. They actually could benefit from the mobile and growing populations. Then we also ask people, why are you thinking about moving abroad for work? And the main reasons are actually finance, career. So it's not, we thought maybe it will be, the better quality of life will be the top reason, or a better climate or whatever, but actually most people really think of this as a professional opportunity to get access to different career paths and to work, of course. Main reason people don't want to move is that they are not able to bring family and partners. So that's also an interesting insight. If we want to increase the mobile population, that's one of the first things one needs to solve. The strong emotional attachment to country, I think that's a bit hard to solve. But the family members, that's an issue one could. Then, super interesting, this is always the juiciest part of the research, where people want to go. So we publish a ranking of the top destination countries for work. And we are always quite surprised it changes a bit. This is since 2014 to 2020. The US led the ranking, then it was a big deal when it dropped in 2020. You see, actually, Germany was extremely popular in 2018, and we attributed this to the very open attitude during the refugee crisis compared to the other countries, but then it kind of went back to normal, let's say. And then also you can see there are some switch, as in more non-European or kind of the non-Western destinations coming up. And now the 2023 ranking, that's the latest. Australia has been rising steadily through the ranks and finally hit top spot. That was a bit surprising. So we also interview people around the world, like random people we pick from the survey. And so many Europeans or even Americans said, I really want to go to Australia because it's peaceful, it's nice life. Australia also invested quite a bit in their immigration policies, made it simpler for people to come. So it's kind of well-deserved. US is second. Germany is the first non-English speaking country, so that's still a good ranking, right? And then it becomes a bit more diverse. So we have Japan, also Singapore, and Spain. It was always popular, but during COVID, actually, people didn't want to go to Spain, and now it kind of came back. So it's interesting that when something happens, like a major, political change, you do see people preferences change quite quickly in reaction. Then we also ask people, why did you choose that specific country? And that were the 10 things that they could choose from. And we thought it's going to be more different country to country, but actually it's not that different. So the top 10 countries were mostly chosen for what kind of job opportunities are there, which again makes sense, being connected to the work aspect. And then you see there are some nuances, like Switzerland and Spain are more quality life countries, while France is again chosen more for quality of life. There are some that are more standing out for their innovative environment, like Singapore or Japan, they rank pretty high on that. So there are some differing country brands. And also when we work with government sometimes, we say you need to focus on your strengths and you need to build a real brand for your country like you would build for a product or for a company. But then we also ask people, what are some practical considerations why you chose that country? So the first one was like the information about the country, and this one was more about you and your connection to the country. And speaking the language is important, but others recommending the country is nearly even more important. And then, there are a couple of other considerations. Do people live there? Do we have a diaspora? Have I been there before? But you can see for Germany, it's not the language, but it's the recommendation. So that's also interesting, what drives people to a specific country. Now, another finding, Insight 3, when it comes to cities, the preferences are a bit more constant. This surprises us every time. London has been the #1 city for 10 years constantly, and the second one is not even coming that close. And we think about why. Even during Brexit, London was the most popular city, and the city brand and the country brand, they don't move together. That's also interesting. And then we thought about it. So this survey is really global. So you have people from South Africa, Indonesia, Latin America, whatever, and London is kind of the common denominator. Still from the past history, the Commonwealth, the language, nearly everyone has a friend that lives in London. It's just simply no other city has managed to be that widely popular. But then, actually on the city ranking, there are a lot of non-European cities. Dubai and Abu Dhabi have been coming up continuously, but you also have Tokyo, Sydney, Singapore, and some of these classic European destinations have been rather losing appeal, but also the US cities. Now, what do people want? So we also ask people when moving abroad, what kind of employer are you looking for in the other country? What kind of features they would need to have for you to want to work there and uproot your life, essentially. And basic but important that English has to be the official working language. I think that sometimes is a bit of an issue in Germany and some other countries, but it's really a must. But then, what is interesting is cultural factors are as important as salary. Equal employment opportunities, culture of acceptance, so that they want to work at a place where they know that they are welcome and they want to be paid for it, but it's not the most important. And then we also ask them during the relocation, maybe something directly interesting for those working in mobility, what do they want their employers to support? And people had pretty high expectations. Not sure if that's always possible, but they really see housing, visa, overall relocation to be the role of their employers. And then some also said, I would appreciate an onboarding program also to support me integrate my family. But there people feel a bit more confident, kind of that, okay, we'll manage with my family, but the housing, visa, and kind of the overall process, most people said the employer should help me with that. And then the final finding is this was all physical mobility. But of course, we also ask a question about virtual mobility. We have not been asking this since 2014, but since COVID we are asking it. Would you work, how is the question phrased? 1 second. Would you work remotely for an employer that has no physical presence in your country? That's how we phrased it. And the majority of people said yes. It was 57% in 2020 and 66% right now. So clearly this is becoming something people are more comfortable with. And the question was really phrased in a way that this employer has not even like a small office in your country, nothing. And you can see also that people from different parts of the world have different level of comfort with such arrangements. I mean, of course, in the developing world, I think people are generally more open to all kinds of different opportunities. We see that also with other questions we asked. But that is also good news because that means talent pools are becoming obviously much more global even without physical relocation. So yes, in summary, talent continues to be mobile. Top destination countries change pretty fast, but nothing can beat London somehow. And mobile talent really have high expectations to their employers. So one needs to be thinking a bit, how do I tap into this mobile talent pool? But, of course, one can also think about virtual mobility, which is definitely here to stay and is likely to reshape a bit how we think about this space. So this was just a quick overview of some of the key trends we observed. And then, of course, what can one do about it? Actually, both employers and governments have quite a bit of work to do. And those governments where the population is in the shrinking and static bucket, especially so. But it's not that different. In the end, you need a plan and strategy. What kind of talent I need? Which countries do I want to go to? How many? Where do I want to get them from? You need to refine how you attract and recruit them. Sometimes these even very practical questions. How do I post a job ad in another country? Need to find the channels, need to find the right way. Also, maybe you need to word that job ad differently in that country. So all of that one needs to figure out. So for governments, building bilateral partnerships, promoting jobs in your country, in other target countries, is something that helps. Then, of course, you need to figure out your relocation and immigration support for employers. I think many of you are working on that, how to provide not only logistical assistance, but a nice experience. And also a welcoming culture and so on. It's going a bit beyond that. And also that's where governments also have a huge, huge role, how to restructure immigration processes and policies in a way that is user-friendly to the people, but also to the employers. And finally, onboarding and integration, super important. As a company as well, how do we onboard them? How do we help them? Not only the person, but also sometimes their families. And of course, there a government can do a lot by promoting social integration, labor market integration of the newcomers. So there were a couple of thoughts. Happy to take some questions. I think we also talk a little bit with Hannah about some of the findings. This is the study. If you'd like to read it, please do. We also have a lot of stories of the people we interviewed. There are some people we've been interviewing for 10 years. Then they move around the world and tell us about it. That's one of the most interesting parts. So highly recommend to read it.
And yeah, we'll have a Q&A, so prepare your questions already. But first, I have one. So because now we learned a lot about talents preferences, but we also spoke about cost pressure. And so for the company, always being, how do you say it in English? I always forget what's the right wording, being caught between a rock and a hard place. Is that correct? Yes? Nice. And I think they're kind of what do you make possible, but at what cost? And so what are ideas, what are things that you've seen, kind of how much can companies cater to what talents want, and what are maybe cost-effective ways to do so?
Yes, that's a good question. Quite often we struggle with this also with our clients. So I think when it comes to mobility, it's the difficulty is that sometimes it needs a bit of upfront investment until you make things work. As in, we need to maybe rethink the branding, maybe hire a competent mobility team, maybe think of build the capability to even bring people from abroad. And it's not, unfortunately, it's not something that is a #1 priority for a company quite often. Because to be honest, it's not that half of your people are going to be coming from different countries. It's a new channel, an emerging important channel, but it's just one of them. But so altogether, one would need to make a bit of an initial investment, but then actually in the long term, I think it will save costs, because simply you have access faster to a better talent pool. Sometimes people also willing to work with different salary ranges if, let's say, there is an opportunity for a further career building in a different country. So it's unfortunately the situation where in tough times, maybe not what people would most prioritize. We had actually a lot of discussions after COVID with a lot of our clients when there was this huge war for talent thing and everybody was afraid that people are not going to work anymore. Then people were more interested suddenly to diversify their location strategy. I think now that has died down a little bit with the rise of let's get everyone back to the office. But I think now it's maybe a time when it's now swinging a bit in the opposite direction, and once kind of people calm down a little bit from the recession worries and so on, they will realize that actually the megatrends behind needing talent from abroad, that doesn't change. The fact that population is decreasing in some countries and increasing in others. So I think this is not is not a fad. It's definitely a long-term trend that companies have to invest in it.
Audience. I'll just grab a mic. Who has one?
Working? Yeah. Thank you for the great insights. The question I have is more related with the survey, because it mentions here 150,000 people. Did I miss that slide? What professions did they come, their backgrounds?
Good question. It's actually a really good mix. So we have, I think, 20-something different professions, and it's fairly equally spread, so I couldn't say like it's more blue collar or more this industry or that. It's a pretty decent representation across different professions. The only thing is, this survey we fill through a collaboration with job boards. So basically, people who fill this survey are the average person that would register on an online job search website, right? So we would not have a ton of blue-collar manual forest workers, right? So that's the only bias in the survey.
Thank you.
All right. I got a question regarding retention rates for those that have relocated. Did something in your survey include questions around what made you stay, what made you leave, or move on to another country, and what were the reasons?
Oh, thank you. Great question. So actually, we did have a question that only those filled out who have already relocated once. And we have two questions. One is, are you thinking of moving back? And the other one was, why are you staying in the country? And then we compared the why are you staying in a country with the why would the ones not in the country go there. So what was interesting is why you go to the country is what you saw, like the jobs and the quality of life, etc. Why you stay, there actually people were more likely to say stuff like it's safe, it's a good social security, education, etc. So people's priorities, what keeps people in versus what gets them there, is a little bit different. We also check, like, do we see a trend in more people wanting to go home? But not really. That's always like a fairly small percent and more or less constant for the last couple of years.
I mean, really interesting, and I would love to actually look more into that topic. Was there also anything mentioned regarding the employer? Like, oh, because the employer didn't support XYZ, I don't know, relocation, visa migration, or didn't have any spouse program, like, were there any reasons mentioned regarding
Actually, that's a good question. We didn't ask those who want to go home why they want to go home. Maybe the next time we can add that. Yeah, okay. That would be interesting.
Thank you.
Oh, there we go. Sorry, get in my steps.
Thanks. Just something that I wanted to ask you is, because as you know, I'm relocating myself. Did you not ask the question of people is, yes, so you're going to be relocated, you're going to be on a sponsored work permit. What about the fear of losing your job? So you've relocated your whole family to a new country, and then the company says, we no longer need you, and now you've got some countries 30 days, 90 days, find a new job or leave. Was that question ever asked of people at the risk of that expense if they've paid for it to move?
It's a good point. Actually, we did not. So we asked them why you don't want to move, and there was one aspect which is kind of a fear of uprooting my whole life. So I think that would be a bit connected, but not that specifically. But maybe we could add that also next time. Yes.
Thanks.
Hi. Not a question, more like a factor in one of the surveys. Did cost of living crisis that we hear about, play any role? Because I see that, London is top one destination, and also to rent a flat there is like,
Yeah.
So just wondering if this was a factor at all, because, Spain emerged, it's cheaper to live there on a European scale.
Yes, I think we actually wondered about that as well. I think overall, people didn't rank cost of living extremely high, right? It was one of the 10 things they could answer, that I want to move to this country because it's cheap. But when we looked at how some of the preferences are shifting, we do see some lower cost countries or cities ranking higher. London, I don't know what's going on there, but in the rest of the ranking, you can see a bit this mix of kind of countries which may be not the most developed, but a nice place to live, cheap, etc., are becoming much more popular. I think that's also a bit connection to the kind of digital nomad, work from everywhere lifestyle, that people are looking more openly at what is a good destination.
Thanks.
Hello. Is there an good example of a company, small or big, I guess rather bigger, who has impact, or which has impact, that is doing it right, or that is, repeating in the data that you're collecting that they are really doing something right, which is visible in the data, but maybe not that frequently presented for others who are not, who didn't dive in the topic that much.
So actually, in this data, we don't really ask anything about companies. Like, we wouldn't know which companies are people moving to, maybe another improvement point. But I find, actually, I would be a bit hard-pressed to really name companies that stand out extremely well. I think I work a lot, my normal day job is I work with HR departments on restructuring HR, modernizing the HR function. What I can see is global mobility is always one of the topics that discussed. No, it's not a shared services, it's not just operations, it should be strategic, we should raise the importance. So I see a lot of, and I mostly work with large employers, are moving on a path of kind of more strategic mobility and so on. But actually it would be difficult for me to name one that I say is doing it extremely well. What we did look into, and that was super interesting, is there are quite a few companies that are very good in managing a globally spread kind of half virtual or completely virtual workforce. We did like a small study, but those are not necessarily the largest players. Actually, those were companies like WordPress, for example. I think it's the company that runs WordPress, who were already set up completely location agnostic before the pandemic. And then they had such interesting practices on how do you onboard someone virtually, how do you build a global culture. That was super interesting. But it was not that they were really good in physical mobility per se, they were just really good in running a virtually dispersed company.
Yeah. I meant something like that, so thank you.
Also interesting there to know like that you are the person who can advocate now for us to like bring more VP global mobilities directly into the companies and like have a more strategic function. So good lobbying.
Yeah, we try. Yeah.
I have one, thank you. Have you seen any correlations between people wanting to relocate to a certain country with openness of the immigration policies of those countries? Because I see this balance there, for example, in the UK, also cultural aspects that could, I don't know, set a trend.
Yes, very interesting. We did do a separate analysis, I can even share it probably after, where we scored countries on how open they actually are, and then we plotted it against how much people want to go there. And it's not a clear-cut correlation. You have countries that are open and people know it and want to go, and you have also the opposites. That countries where everybody wants to go, like Japan is super popular, but it's not really the most open country in terms of immigration regulations. But you have also the opposite, countries that actually are really welcoming, but you wouldn't think about it. Like some countries in the Middle East were back then, that maybe the brand is different, but actually the policies are there. So I think it's, we do see that this survey is a bit about dreams. That's why the report was titled as such. Whether the reality can always match the dream, not always.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Otherwise, I would also invite you to maybe, I hope you're staying for lunch, then maybe connect with Orsolya over lunch. One last question, just because we are in Berlin. Berlin has dropped. It's very sad, of course, like also cost of living, cost of housing has increased. I don't know if that's maybe a reason, but specifically around like Berlin, what are the trends that you're seeing, and like, do you think the downward trend increased?
And actually, I think it's not about Berlin specifically, it's about some of the classic European destinations. So basically, and it's not even that they did something very wrong per se, it's just they were pushed out by some of the kind of more dynamic upcoming global cities. So it's more being pushed out by Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Sydney, whatever, not so much that Berlin changed for the worse, right? Maybe except for the cost of living, but it's simply there's more competition.
Yeah. It's also interesting, I think, the competition aspect and like how governments maybe need to change the way of thinking from like trying to limit migration to like actually being more attractive. That's another one, but that would maybe take it too far now. So big thanks to you for sharing those insights. It was great to hear them. Also really, again, like inviting everyone maybe to approach you at lunch to like get some of the numbers that can help you again, like to unlock bigger budgets. But yeah, otherwise, we'll have lunch now. We have a bit of a break and then we continue with our roundtables afterwards. But yeah, first of all, a very big applause for you.
Thank you.